Hello and welcome to Tales from the Hut and Hangar, Volume 4, Chapter 4 with Mike Laundy. If you want to listen to the other podcasts in this series with Mike, go to the description and also there'll be some on the end of the screen after this chapter. Basically, we're continuing Mike's story and now he's going into Civvy Street, so hope you enjoy it.
I actually left, I suppose about a year before I left. I got a message saying, would I go up to British Aerospace at Wharton to do an incident rating on an ex-RF pilot who's going to be flying the Jetstream 31 in Saudi Arabia. And I was the only guy qualified to do an incident rating on Jetstream 31s because the Navy had them as a Mark III. And so I was a qualified examiner on it. And so, yeah, I got one of the other guys to give me a lift up in one of the Mark IIs up to Wharton, and then I was introduced to this guy. He's a very pleasant bloke. He's another ex-hunter guy.
He comes back again.
And they'd actually fitted up the back of a Jetstream as the rear seat of a Tornado.
Oh, okay.
So they had all the kit in the back that a navigator would have in the back of it. You know, it was almost, apart from it didn't have a bank seat, it had an ordinary seat.
No,
but everything else was the same in the back.
windows.
But next to him, an instructor would sit, because they found they were having a lot of difficulty in training the guys, because they could only go up on an airplane with a pilot. They couldn't have a navigator with them, help them to train. So they were flying at the same heights the Tornado would fly, but half the height. But they had a computer on board, but it was a very impressive setup. And so they said, yeah, well, there's the airplane, so if you can go and do an incident rating on this pilot so you can get out to Saudi. And I thought, I don't actually have a civilian pilot's license at that stage. I only have my military stuff, and that airplane is clearly not an RF airplane because it's covered in Saudi Arabian markings.
Yeah.
I said to the other guy who's going to check, I said, have you no idea what the legality of this is? He said, I don't know. He said, but it's got Saudi markings on it. So I said, well, it's the Saudis' problem. So off we went, we did the rating. Well, after I did the rating with him, I was shown around the bit they had at Wharton for the support for the Saudis. And I went into the office of the guy that was running it, and he said, would you be interested in flying the Jetstream out there? He said, we've got 3 aircraft, and we've got 2 aircraft, I think he said, and we've got 3 pilots, I think it was something like that. He said, and I think we're going to need another pilot. He said, would you be interested in doing it? And he said, this is what we'll pay you.
Interested.
That was a lot. Yes, I am interested. I said, just have a word with my wife. And so I told her when I got back, they will pay me all this money. You won't have to live with me anymore because we weren't getting on particularly well.
Right.
And they'll pay the school fees for our 2 sons. And so go for it. So it by sheer chance, I had an option to retire at the age of 44. And which was just about exactly a year later. So I just gave the Air Force the year's notice they required, saying I just said I would retire, I would exercise my option and retire at the age of 44.
So in a way you knew you were sort of retiring anyway. So
well, I wasn't planning on retiring then.
Oh, I see.
I was going to stay.
So were you sad to leave the RAF, or you were getting itchy feet then, or?
Not really.
Just as long as you're flying something, I suppose.
It just struck me that I'd still be flying. I'd be getting paid a lot more for doing the flying than I was getting in the Air Force. And there are all sorts of perks which went with going out there. And it just struck me as being an interesting thing to do. So anyway, I just carried on normally on the squadron. And then after about 3 months, I hadn't heard anything, so I phoned them up. And they said, oh, we don't know anything about it. I said, oh, well, I'm retiring from the Air Force to come and join you. And they said, oh, well, that chap, his admin wasn't very good, so we sacked him.
Right.
And there aren't going to be any more Jetstream pilots going out there. Okay. And in fact, there was one Jetstream less shortly after that when one of them crashed and killed everybody on board.
Oh, crikey.
And they said, how do you fancy a HS-125, business type? I thought, oh, yes, that sounds really good. And they said, okay, we'll put you down for that. Didn't hear anything for another couple of months, called them up about that. Oh, yes, we've forgotten about you. No, they've all gone now. And they said, we can offer you PC-9s. No, PC, you know what PC-9 is? Yeah, the training airplane. I thought, that wasn't in my plan. I said, well, well, I better have something to go to when I retire. I said, okay, put me down for that. They said, well, it could take anything up to 4 months before I can let you know, because it has to go through all the, they have to look at everything. And there was a Navy guy there who was about to leave and join the airline. It's called Jim Wells. He was a great buddy. He came into my office, kadunk, great pile of books, when a thump on the desk beside me. I said, what the hell was that, Jim? He said, Mike, that is your ATPL. Start working. So I did.
Right.
And so at the time I was actually examining Navy pilots to get their air transport pilot's license, because they could ask for a military instructor to fly with them to assess them. So one guy actually failed him and made him resit it, because he got his checks wrong after engine failed after takeoff, which he wasn't very happy about. Actually grounded him for a week until he worked out what he was supposed to be doing in the aeroplane. But that was unusual. So I was checking the Navy guys out, and I started sending my application off to various places, and I got a lot of replies back, and I got invited for numerous interviews. Of course, this would have been 1989, and it was at a time when the airlines were searching for pilots everywhere. I finished up with something like 8 job offers. And one of them, which I really quite fancied, didn't come through right at the very end, because I'd actually written to them and say, how come you haven't given me a job offer when you've given job offers to the guys who I've been checking out, who have got far less experience than me? And I got a letter back from the chief pilot, and this was a company called Air Europe. And he came back and said, terribly sorry, Mike. He said, come and have an interview straight away. He said, we're really interested in you. He said, my secretary had decided what the criterion was for choosing pilots.
Oh, right.
And
so
hers wasn't the same as mine.
That was booming times for Air Europe then, wasn't it?
Yeah.
'Cause that's roughly when I started at Bristol Airport.
Oh, right.
So
yeah.
Air Europe were coming in then and
Yeah.
growing with Fokker 100s and 75s.
Yeah. Well, I joined Air Europe. Actually, I joined them 3 days before I left the Air Force. So for 3 days, I got 2 salaries.
Oh, nice.
And I did. I was on the 737, so I went through. The only funny thing was that the 737, of course, all glass cockpit. You have all these sort of glass computerized displays, which I'd never used before.
What did they have? 400s, would it, or 300s?
They had the 300s.
Yeah.
The day I joined was the day the Kedgeworth disaster happened.
Oh, crikey.
Actually, they had 300 and 400s. They had both. And I'm listening to this happening on the radio while I'm driving down to Gatwick to join Air Europe. Yeah. And I thought, well, that's interesting. But anyway, I went through the simulator, and I could just about cope. In those days, we didn't have any sort of simulated instruction for using the FMS flight management system. We just got a booklet of lots and lots of pictures, hundreds of pictures of different screens on it. It's really quite hard getting your head around it. And so I had to do an instrument rating in it, which I did. And after the guy said, well, that was okay, that was fine. He said, I think you could probably have done better. What he didn't know was I didn't fly any of it using the glass cockpit. I did all the standby instruments, which I was used to. And then, of course, I was a first officer anyway on the airplane, and you pick it up then when you're using it all the time. So I picked it up, and and so.
Where were you based then? Where did you live then?
That was at Gatwick, and after I'd been with them 6 months, I had done about 530 hours on the 737, and they were buying the Fokker 100s. And so they basically asked me if I was interested in the Fokker 100 and an early command. So I volunteered for the Fokker 100. Interestingly enough, there was about 3 of us there from my same entry at Cranwell, who'd all retired at 44 and joined Air Europe.
Wow.
And so I went on to the Fokker 100, and I started my command training. So I was in the left-hand seat doing my command training. I flew in the right-hand seat for a couple of months. Then I went to the left-hand seat for the command training. I did all the simulator stuff, and so I was actually flying it, and I spent about 3 trips, I think, of finishing it when they went bust. So all of a sudden, everything stopped dead.
Yeah.
And 600 pilots on the dole, scrubbing around. And I was very fortunate because there's an advert for a direct entry Jetstream captain to Cardiff on Euromanx. So
Euromanx.
I applied for that, and of course I I suppose, 3,000 odd hours on the Jetstream. I had a lot of experience on the Jetstream, and I got the job. So I was only unemployed for a month, and then I finished up in Manx.
So did you fly from the Isle of Man or Cardiff or whatever? Or?
From Cardiff.
From Cardiff, yeah. I remember
It was mainly from Cardiff, mainly
network,
either out to Germany or up to Scotland and back. And I sort of, it was like almost like a little commune. There's one of the first officers there was married with a young daughter and a dog. He'd rented quite a big house, and so there were another two of us lived in the house with him, had our own rooms in it to help pay the rent for it. And so that worked very well, just down the road from Cardiff, and I'd go home at the weekends.
Yeah, all right.
And so I flew it from there for about a year.
Did they go bust? They did eventually.
No, they didn't actually. They got taken over long term. They got taken over by British Airways. But what happened?
They merged with everyone, didn't they?
The young guy, the first officer there, I think he was saying one day, he said, I've just been turned down. He said, I applied for a job flying 737. So I said, what was that? He said, that was a UK Leisure. They were looking for pilots. I said, I'd never even heard of them. And he said, yeah, they want some more pilots. So I got in touch with their UK Leisure. They invited me down for an interview. And they offered me a job.
Yeah.
Well, in fact, they didn't offer me a job straight away. They put me on the waiting list for a job. They said, we think we'll probably need you in about a year's time. Probably only for summers only. But I thought, well, I need to get back onto jets if I can. And so I was on the waiting list for them. There was another company there called Inter-European at Cardiff.
Yeah, I worked on them. The
chief pilot for them, I knew. I'd met him in Air Europe, and I didn't like him. He was not good in the simulator. He would try and break you in the simulator, which is not the way to train. And so I thought, well, and he told me, he said, you're going to come work for us, we're recruiting pilots. And I said, no, I'm not. And they actually recruited all the guys who were ahead of me on the list for Air UK Leisure, because they'd all been offered temporary contracts, Inter-European offered them permanent contracts. So all of a sudden I got a call from Air UK Leisure saying, well, we need you now, as soon as you can
I see.
get away.
In some ways, yeah.
So I joined them. To work out my time, I finished up being the very last one to join them, which meant I was on the bottom of the seniority list of the pilots who just joined them. The ones who joined Inter-European at the end of the summer were all made redundant. They knew they were going to make redundant, but they gave them permanent contracts to get hold of them, and then
because their flight schedule dropped off, didn't it, in the winter?
Yeah, but it's not very ethical.
No,
but for me it was good because I was then in Air UK Leisure, and by the time I joined them, they said, it's going to be a permanent contract, by the way, it won't be a temporary one, because they just bought two 767s.
That's right, yeah.
And they discovered that when they got the 767s, then they already had 737s, and there was the co-pilots on the 737s tended to be very junior because they'd all come across from Air UK, and the more senior co-pilots in Air UK were interested in getting commands, which they weren't going to get on the 737. So it was done by juniority. The most junior co-pilots came across, and then of course they got the 767s. So a chunk of the captains went across the 767, and a lot of the co-pilots couldn't be promoted because they didn't have enough time with the airplane. And so I walked in with lots of hours, and a year later I was in the left-hand seat.
Ah, okay.
And
what's that on the 7.6?
No, it's on the 7.3.
7.3, yeah.
And I hung in there when we went through a great downturn in industry, and they were really struggling. We all agreed to take a pay cut, and I was at the bottom of the captain's seniority list, and I thought I'm going to ping off this any moment, but I didn't. I just hung in there, and because And the other lucky thing about it was I had 530 hours on 7.3s when I joined them, and they wanted a minimum of 500 hours. I got in by the skin of. There's a lot of luck in the game sometimes.
Especially in that industry, crikey.
But
they end up part of KLM, didn't they? Yeah, UK.
Well, yeah.
Didn't they flog off?
Well, what happened? They wanted to get rid of their. First of all, they wanted to get rid of the 737s because the Airbuses were more economic than the 737s, and they got rid of some. But they finally did get rid of them. KLM, of course, owned part of Air UK Leisure as well at that stage. And in the end, they said, we will take 4 of your 737s into KLM. So they took them into KLM. It took them a good 3 months to have them converted to KLM standard with first class in it. They got rid of the air stairs getting onto it and things like that. And UK Leisure then had surplus pilots, so sending the senior guys went off to do the Airbus course as they were getting Airbuses. Those of us who were less senior in the captain's list went on to the 737 in Amsterdam. So I went out to Amsterdam and I spent 9 months in Amsterdam flying for KLM, which was bloody marvellous. We had a wonderful time in Amsterdam. They said, we'll give you accommodation there and you'll get certain amount of allowances. You'll get a pass so you can fly back to the UK for your days off. And it's, I think it was, what was it? We did something like 6 days on and then 3 days off back in the UK. And part of the time was standby. And they said, we'll arrange it so on your last day on duty, you can always get a flight back that night. And your first day on duty won't be until the afternoon, so you can fly out that day. And the flights were to and from Stansted. And initially they said, we'll give you a taxi. And then they came back and said, would you accept £50 in lieu of a taxi for each journey? Well, I said yes, because I discovered that if I took my ticket across to the KLM desk in Amsterdam, I could then go standby on a direct flight to Heathrow. And by that time, I was with my second wife. We were living in Ealing, and it cost me £3 in the underground to get to Ealing from Heathrow. I mean, going back, I'd go from Stansted, but then I got the train and things to Stansted and fly out from Stansted. So for me, it worked out very well. And I thought, do I really want to live in a hotel this time? I thought, no, not really. So I put a notice in the cabin crew room saying, does anybody have a spare room in their house? And one of the girls came up to me and said, yes, I've got a spare room. Come and have a look at my house. So I went round, had a look at it was a rented place. It was the ground floor of a block of flats in part of Amsterdam called De Pijp, a bit like the East End of London. It was a great place to be in, but it could be a bit rough and ready at times.
Yeah.
And she said, yeah, I think we'll be fine here. She said, I'm not really living here very much. She said, I have a relationship in the States, and I do long haul all the time. So when I come back, I usually go straight out the States. She said, occasionally I might be here, and I've got my own bedroom, which is a separate one, which I'll leave locked. And I said, well, I need to bring my car out, so I can get to work more easily instead of public transport. How do I do that? She said, oh, I'll sort that out for you. She's a typewriter, bang away on a typewriter in Dutch, of course. And she said, here you go, sign this. I said, what does it say? Oh, of course, she said, you don't speak Dutch. She said, yeah, it's just to say that you're my English lover and you are going to be living with me and you have a car which is English registered, and I would like to have it registered here as I don't have a car and I'm entitled to have a parking slot in this area. And she says, but don't worry, I don't want to be a lover at all. I have this relationship in America. I never knew if it was a bloke or a female, actually. Right. And off she went on a bike and she came back with a parking pass. I could park anywhere within a kilometre of her house.
Wow, enterprising young lady. Wow, that's good.
So enterprising. I only ever saw her twice. I was there for 9 months, and there were only 2 occasions when she came in. And by which time I'd sublet the other... the bedroom I had there, I sublet to one of the other guys. And I had a camp bed in the dining room, which worked fine.
So what happened to the after KLM then?
Well, after KLM, when that all finished, a lot of the guys back in the UK were saying, oh, well, you're probably going to be out of a job and all this, that and the other. And so we had T-shirts printed which had the 1690 Club on it. Because those of us who weren't living in a hotel, we got £1,690 a month tax-free to live in Amsterdam.
That's great.
And it paid for my first divorce.
Come in handy then.
So yeah, I came back and I went straight up to Miami to do an Airbus course.
Oh, okay.
Which was really rough. So that was that was good fun doing that. And they had a good idea actually, because we arrived there and none of us really knew anything about Airbuses, apart from the fact that it was all fly-by-wire and computerised and all the rest of it. And so the first thing they said when we joined them, they said, look, there's a lot of rubbish talked about the Airbus, so you're all going to fly the simulator today. And we'll put you in the simulator with a full daylight visual screen all the way around. And we'll put you in, 2 of you in the cockpit, no instruction whatsoever, fly a circuit.
Oh, great.
Marvellous, absolutely marvellous. You've got into this thing, and, right, and you're sitting on the end of the runway, and today, like, visual simulators are fantastic with the motion and all the rest of it. And right, got a stick. Well,
Yeah.
Forward must be down, back must be up, that's fine. There's some throttles in the middle, look, there's flaps there, there's gear there. There's the airspeed indicator, don't need anything else. Flap the throttle down the runway, off it comes. And this is like flying a chipmunk with the stick over the side. And fly it around the circuit, put some flap down, and put the wheels down and land it. And we all did it. And I thought, well, that's actually great fun. They said, right, it's going to be another month before you fly it again, because now you've got all the ground school to do.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
So it's a good way of doing it, because everybody came out sort of just grinning, because
And who put you on this
fine.
course? Was it KLM? No.
It was, by that time, we were Air UK Leisure,
Right.
which then became Leisure International.
That's right. Yeah.
And KLM was selling off the
Those bits, weren't they?
Air UK Leisure bit. So by that time, in Amsterdam, it was a mixture of Air UK people who've been given a 737 course to go out there, and those of us already flying it. But when we came back, we went back to Air UK Leisure as it was, and then eventually Leisure International, flying the Airbus. And you got some funny things on the Airbus, because if you had computer failures, you could finish up in what they call direct rule command on your side stick, which meant if you touched it, it's only a small stick, it's only about sort of 6 inches, 10 centimetres tall, and a small movement, it would roll the airplane quite quickly. But normally when you moved it, then the computer sensed what you wanted to do and would roll it smoothly for you. But in direct command, the slightest movement, and the airplane would be twitching all over the place. And the instructor on it was a bit like John Wayne. He said, "Gee, Mike," he said, "just treat it like there's a bunch of dog shit on the top of the stick." And he said, "Just hold it with two fingers, and think, oh," and then you hardly move it, and it worked fine. Which it did.
Yeah, there's not a lot of movement in it, is there?
No. And I had a first officer with me who was having a bit of trouble with the flight management system, which was different to the Boeing. And his way of getting it set up when he was flying as the P1, the flying pilot, he would hit every button he could find on it until something came up which looked about right. And I was going, "Look, please don't do that. Just learn a pattern which you have to do on it. You don't have to think what to do, but if you learn the pattern, you put your fingers on it." Because if I was flying and he started hitting buttons, it would be a bit chaotic. And he was doing an approach on one occasion with one engine at idle, and it was going slower and slower and slower. And the instructor could see that I was about to intervene, and it came quietly over my earphones. "Don't say a word. Let him see what happens." And as it was about to stall, it flew itself out of the stall. All of a sudden, the power came up, and it started climbing away. And he was going, "Oh, it went answer to the stick." And they go back, said, "No, it's just saved you from crashing." So it was very clever, was the Airbus. Yeah. When we got back to the UK, they said, because the Airbus said, you have to be able to fly it with limited computer control, which was tricky, but it was doable. When we got back home, and we were given a check on it before we could actually start flying passengers, said, "We don't believe in that. You've got to fly it without any computers and get it down." Well, that was interesting. And I think we talked before about the engines. Well, that's how we did it.
Oh, okay.
So you'd have your hands on the two throttles. You had no roll, pitch control whatsoever. You had a limited amount of rudder control. And so if you wanted to go up, you pushed both forward because you had low-stung engines, and that would pitch the nose up before it started accelerating. If you want to go down, you pull them both back. That would drop the nose. And if you wanted to turn, you split them. So you got asymmetric power, which would turn you around. And then we had to get it down onto the runway, and they gave us full daylight visual at Gatwick. And the first time I completely lost it. As I was coming in, it started oscillating, and the nose was going down, sort of short of the runway. Pushed both of them forward, and it just went wham! About 100 yards short of the runway, about 45 degrees nose down, smack into the undershoot. And I said, well, that didn't work very well. It wasn't a pass-fail thing for us. It was just something so we could think about it. And then the next one, I got it down, but I would have wiped the undercarriage off. It hit so hard. And I think about the third attempt, I managed to get it. I wouldn't say it was a good landing, but I got it down on the runway. So it was interesting. It gave itself some like a 30-mile approach where you could try and stabilise everything and keeping it. It was very difficult to do.
Yeah, I'm sure it was.
Do you remember there was a TriStar.
Yeah,
Had that engine
DC-10.
failure. Sorry, DC-10.
That's right. Yeah,
that was it.
Sioux City, wasn't it?
Yeah,
That was
and they
done.
tried to get that down, and we thought we're doing the same as those poor guys
Yeah.
had to do, but they I don't think they'd ever practiced it, so
No.
they had the problem that,
And you were doing it for fun and simulator.
and we were doing the simulator.
Yeah.
At least we found out how to do it.
Mm.
Well, the company I was working for, which was originally part of AUK, by now was called AUK Leisure, and eventually became Leisure International. And so I got checked out with a few flights with training captains on the Airbus, and then started carrying passengers with them. And on my pilot's license it said A320 and A321, but I hadn't actually flown the 321. I'd only flown the A320, both in training and for real. But the company started buying A321s, which are a bigger version of the A320. They're a bit longer, and you're more likely to bang the tail on the ground when you rotate it for takeoff. And so the company said 2 flights with a training captain just to get used to the airplane before you carry passengers. So I go into work one day at Stansted, where I was flying from, and I was told, yes, your airplane is all ready to go, it's a 321. I said, but I've never flown a 321. Oh, but we haven't got anybody else. You better have a word with the chief pilot. So I had a word with the chief pilot, and I said, I haven't had any flights with a training captain on the 321. Oh, he said, well, we haven't got anybody to spare. He said, look, your first officer's flown the 321 a couple of times. Why don't you let him fly the first leg and you see how to do it, and you can fly the second
Get
one.
the knack of it, yeah.
And he said that it's very similar. He said, just be very careful you don't over-rotate it and hit the tail on the ground. And so I went out to this 321, which was absolutely brand new. It had been delivered from France the day before.
Oh, crikey.
And the only flying it had done was its initial acceptance test flight. And it smelled like a new car inside,
yeah.
you know, this sort of lovely sort of clean smell and all the rest of it. And I know some of the cabin crew were saying, oh, this is lovely, it's a new aeroplane. I said, yes, I'll tell you something when we get back. Oh, no, tell us so, no, we'll wait till we get back and then I'll have a chat. So off we went, and it was absolutely fine. And the first officer, we chatted on the way out about the odd little quirks of the 321, which really weren't very many. It was almost identical. The main thing was it was longer, it was a little bit heavier, and at the rear end of it you had a little bumper, and if you hit it, you could actually hit it a few times, and it had coloured stripes on the end of it. And if it got to the red one, then they had to replace the bumper at the back. And so yeah, that was all fine. And I flew it back, and I had no problems at all flying it and landing it. And when we were on the bus coming back, the crew said, "What is it going to tell us?" And I said, well, that was my first flight in 321. And they said, well, yeah, it's a brand new airplane, wasn't it? I said, yes, but it was my first flight ever.
In a 321.
In a 321, but I thought it's probably best not to tell you before we did it. So, yeah, that was really the story about the 321. I didn't fly the Airbus for very long, just a couple of years, because after I'd been flying for a couple of years, I had a house in Cornwall, and I was driving down to Cornwall, and my mobile phone rang, and it was the chief pilot on the at AUK Leisure, and he said, Mike, he said, how would you like to go on the 767? I said, I'd love to. And he said, you're not really next on the list. He said, there were 2 guys ahead of you. He said, one of them doesn't want to go to Manchester, and it will be in Manchester, not at Gatwick. And he said, one of them doesn't want to go to Manchester, so he's turning it down. He said, the other guy is Captain So-and-so. I said, oh yes, I know about him. He said, yes, he does go sick rather a lot. It seems to be at his own convenience sometimes.
Right.
So we're not even offering it to him. We're just telling him, you won't be going on the 767 because you tend to go sick a lot, and it'd be very inconvenient if you were abroad somewhere. So he's not even going to get the chance. So he got the option. So he said, if you want to have a chat with your wife, get back to me. I said, don't need to chat to the wife, I'll accept it. He said, are you sure? I said, yes.
Right.
And carried on down to Cornwall. And so I did mention to my wife that I was going to the 767, but I completely forgot to tell her it was going to be in Manchester. And they sent me off to do the 767 course with CTC training, which were based down in the New Forest. And they had a good setup there. And about, I suppose, probably about 3/4 of the way through the course, we suddenly discovered that we'd been taken over by A2000.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's right.
So we're now part of A2000. So carried on and finished the course there, and then sort of spoke to people at A2000. And the first guy I spoke to, what was his name? Well, it doesn't matter, but he said the deputy fleet manager was, I better not mention his name actually, it was a certain guy.
Yeah, okay.
Who I'd had a difference of opinion with on the Boeing 737. He was one of the training 7s when I was flying that. And with him, we'd flown the 737 into Murcia. And bear in mind, I'd just come up from a job where I'd been training guys to be flying instructors. And this guy gave me no briefing before the flight. He said hardly anything while we were flying.
God.
I briefed him on the approach I was going to do. And he made no comment, and so I started letting down and said, "You can't do that, you've just gone through a patch of cloud." Well, I was going to an airfield where they had no instrument landing system for civil aircraft. It was Murcia, which at that time was joint military civil. So it was going to be a visual approach. And so I told him that my plan was to let down over the sea to a safe height under cloud, then fly in to the airfield and land in the airfield. And so I got an instant telling off, if you like, for going through a patch of cloud
Right.
without any radar cover. And I thought, I'm not quite sure I'm supposed to do this. And arrived at Murcia, when they told us the wind was down the runway, it wasn't. The wind was across the runway, it was quite gusty.
Oh.
And so I decided that I was going to do shall I say, a positive landing. I wasn't that used to the airplane by then. I think it was probably about my 5th or 6th series of flights on them. And anyway, as I'm about to touch down, he suddenly grabbed hold of the throttles. And didn't say anything, he just grabbed hold of the throttles. And he knocked my hand off the throttles and took the throttles. So I let go, because he appeared to have taken control. But he didn't take control of the throttles, not the stick. He decided I was going to land too hard,
Right.
and he wanted to push the throttles forward to give a slight nose-up pitch to cushion the landing. I thought he'd taken control and let go of the controls. Consequently, the airplane landed itself, sort of.
Mm.
And it bounced one wheel to the other, just went literally clattering down the one way, from one wheel to the other. And I'm sitting there, biting my tongue, not daring to say anything, because I thought, this is a new company, he's a training captain, and I cannot believe what he just did.
Crikey.
So I just basically didn't say a word, and as we came in, eventually he started giving me a working for the landing and all the rest of it, and I just basically didn't say anything, and we flew back in almost complete silence. Well, that company went bust, and sometime later I was in the Independent Pilots Association. It was like a bit like BALPA, but
Yeah.
not quite so unionised, and they had a meeting, and I went to this meeting down at Gatwick, and in the bar after the meeting there's this particular guy sitting there, no
Right.
beer, and it's full of pilots, and he said, "Oh, Mike Laundy, you're the guy who tried to kill me at Murcia." So I said, whatever his name was, "There's something I've been meaning to tell you for a long time." And I gave him a debrief on that.
Oh, right.
at Murcia. Finished up with saying, and to be frank, you were the worst flying instructor I'd ever had the misfortune to fly with.
Wow.
And his face all went reddish, then it had whitish specks on it, and there was complete silence, and you could hear the pin drop, and I finished my pint and went off home. Thought no more about it until I joined Air 2000. And guess who the deputy fleet manager was?
Oh, no.
For the 767. So that wasn't a good thing. And I was speaking to the fleet manager when I phoned them up, and he said, "Oh, I've got so and so here, the deputy fleet manager. I don't know what he's done about it. He just says, 'Remember Murcia.'" I thought, "Oh God."
Crikey.
So, that particular guy eventually became the fleet manager, and we never really saw eye to eye. I think we tolerated each other. But I know there was one flight I did on the 76 out to Florida where the weather over on the eastern side of the western side of the Atlantic wasn't good. You often got thunderstorms, but there was going to be a lot of thunderstorms, so we're trying to work out what the weather was. And going across the Atlantic, you're supposed to find out what your diversion weather's doing.
Mm.
And I think my diversion was supposed to be Gander, which was my declared one where I went across. But on the way across, we got the weathers, and the weather was much better at, I forget which one it was, but one of the other airfields. So I just decided that was going to be my diversion when I went across, and we put in our flight report, or the first officers would do as we went along. A bit later on that flight, going down the eastern seaboard of the USA, there were thunderstorms everywhere, and we were actually ducking in. At times, we had each wingtip passing through a cell. They were so close together on either side, and we're being chucked all over the place. And the first officer was saying, I can't keep track of this because he's trying to keep the log of where we're going. I said, just chuck the log away. We're flying the aeroplane. You know, it's much more important that we fly it and we sort of get ourselves out of all this lot without you sort of keeping the bloody blog going.
Yeah.
And so then, a week later, I get hauled into the office. This plug is appalling from your trip. You didn't get the right information for your diversion. I said, I decided to change diversion. Well, you hadn't written it down. Oh, well, tough. And you hadn't put an actual down for the weather. I said, well, by the time I got close enough, get an actual for the weather, I already knew that the weather was fine down the eastern seaboard of Canada.
Yeah.
And I didn't bother getting it because it wasn't necessary. And then he said, and then your plug just stops. I said, it's because we decided, I made the executive decision to fly the aeroplane, complete with the first officer's help, rather than filling in bloody paperwork.
Yeah.
He said, if the CA pick this up and they check it, I said, I'd be quite happy to talk to the CA and tell them exactly what I think about it.
Yeah.
But I was the captain, I made an executive decision, this is what we were going to do.
Yeah.
It was the safest way to operate. So anyway, we landed safely in Florida, and usual tour around the Disney World, but more importantly the local shopping mall. We could pick up a few goodies to take home with us. I loved the 767 when I got on it. It was a lovely airplane to fly, and initially I only flew the 76. My licence says I qualified for both the 757 and the 767. They are not really the same aeroplane.
No.
There's a lot of difference in the size. The 76 is much bigger and heavier than the 75, but they've got around it by making a step down into the cockpit the 76 and a step up into the cockpit the 75 and longer undercarriage on the 75, so your eye level is similar on both airplanes. But there were a lot of things which weren't quite the same as the airplane, so you had to think when you switched from one airplane to the other. And I found this out fairly early on. For the first, I suppose, 3 or 4 months, I only flew the 76 because they wanted me to consolidate on that. I think I did one flight on the 75, or a double sector on the 75, didn't fly it at all for nearly 3 months or so. And then I did fly a 75 and got checked out on it. And the next time I flew a 75, I taxied into Gatwick. And I'm sure it's the same at Bristol. You've got the line-up signals for the aircraft when you go in. Mm-hmm. You aim it on ahead, which shows you if you're left or right as you're coming in, and we look at one at the side, and you wait until a vertical bar slides across onto the airplane type you've got, and then your cockpit is exactly the right place. And I did that at Gatwick, and I could hear a bit of chatter going on in the cabin, and they were unloading, and then an engineer actually eventually came into the cockpit and said, "Captain, why have you stopped here? The air bridge doesn't reach the door." And they had to put it on the front door instead of the middle door.
Yeah.
I said, well, it should do, we're all lined up. And he said, no, you're not, that says 767. I said, yeah, I'm in the 757. They were very nice about it anyway. They said, well, if you just stay here for a moment, we're going to tug around and put you where you should be parked. And after that, I was always very careful, but I was glad I did it on a 75 and not put a 7.6 where 7.5 should be. I would have hit the air bridge if I'd done that.
Oh right, yeah. Well, they haven't got air bridges at Bristol, but they've got markers on the ground.
Oh right.
You know, because it's quite good when you watch them marshal them in to get them exactly right, and the steps are all in line.
Yeah.
I can imagine that. Because I always thought that, from my point of view, not being a pilot, is that 7.6 and 7.5 are type rated, but you look at it and think it's just a different aircraft. It's as different as a 737 to 727. It has in so many things.
And the 7.6 had a lot of inertia on it compared to the 7.5, but I had a great training captain. I was learning to fly them, and usually when you're doing approach, as you're coming down, you've got the radiometer. You get a voice thing, and it's a sort of 50, 40, 20.
Yeah.
So you know roughly how you are above the ground, and after a while, you sense it, even though you're sitting maybe 20 feet up. You know when your wheel's about to touch. But I found on the 7.6, when you flared it, it would tend to land solidly. And this guy said to me after a couple of flights, and he said, look, he said, when you get down to 20 feet, move the stick back an inch. And he said, and that would just flatten out your flare slightly, and then flare it normally when you come down. And it just clicked.
Oh, okay.
And then invariably did a smooth landing in it, because you were doing a 2-stage flare, which I hadn't really thought about before. Even when I flew the Victor, which is a pretty heavy aeroplane, we didn't do that. We just sort of flew it down, then flared it and touched down. But doing it 2-stage,
so that was a handy tip, I suppose.
Handy tip. I used to pass it on to the first officers.
But the I'll go off, not off subject. The 76 of Bristol that creased its fuselage. I saw it when it came in.
Yeah.
Because at Bristol you got the ski ramp end on 09, and it heavy landed on the hump before it dropped down.
Yeah.
And when they did the investigation, it was to do with the crew straps. But apparently the pilot's got to be piloting commands like this, and the other one's got to be free to do stuff. This is the investigation.
Okay.
And when he hit down, he went forward and knocked something forward, knocked the yoke forward, because he was not fully restrained in. That was the investigation.
Really?
And that's why they come in. And they changed it, apparently. Whereas, apparently they wore it, again, you could tell me, he didn't have it that tight because he needed to move forward to do stuff. Or he couldn't reach it or something. And where he hit hard, he pulled forward and hit the yoke, and it come down too quick. I don't know. It's online, but that was the investigation from doing a hard landing.
Yeah, well, I hadn't heard about that. And I certainly never have my strap slack for landing.
I shall. I've put a link on this this thing about that because it's fascinating.
The only time I had a slight hiccup on landing actually was in an Airbus. And in the Airbus, you had, when you looked across the coaming towards the windscreen, there were 2 little balls on that, and you lined them up. And so when they were lined up, you always got your seat at the same height. Your eye levels all at the same height, and they were just put there so you could get a visual reference. So it's always the same,
right?
When you came in. And on this particular airplane, there was a little screen on the side window, on my left side window, to keep the sun off. Just like a
plastic thing, isn't it?
Plastic thing.
A clean flight deck, so
you just pulled it down, and it kept the sun out your eyes. It was broken on this airplane, so I didn't have any screen on the left-hand side. And I'm flying back up from the Canaries, and the sun's setting in the west, and it's just blazing in through the window, and I discovered that by motoring my seat to the fullest high position, that I could get the sun up just above the top, not in my eyes. And it gradually got dark, and the sun moved as we changed direction. It was more behind us than at the side, and I completely forgotten that I put my seat to its fully elevated position.
Oh, right.
And it went into darkness, and I'm flying back, and of course, I suppose it was probably an hour or so before I got back to Manchester. I fly that one into, and so I'm sitting in the wrong position without knowing it. And so when I came into land, the landing was okay. I landed without any problem at all. I put my feet on the brakes, and the feet went onto the brakes about 3 or 4 inches higher than they should have been, because I was sitting higher. And as I applied the brakes, above where the rudder pedals were, and because the brake on each of the rudder pedals, there was like a bar, and as I put my foot on the brakes, my right toe caught on the bar, and my left toe didn't. So as I put the brakes on, I put my left brake on and started slewing the airplane around to the left on the runway. And I couldn't work out what the heck was happening. I thought, I can't move my right foot. And then I suddenly pushed it, suddenly clicked off, and I got my right brake on. And then it started veering to the right. I pushed on the left rudder to straighten it up, which lifted my right foot back, and the toe of that foot caught under the bar and put the right brake on.
Oh, crikey.
And I just didn't know what was happening with my feet underneath there. And I managed to get it sorted out, but we did a few sort of slews from side to side down the runway.
Yeah, it's funny how the little things can make a difference.
Just little tiny things. And the first officer saying, "What are you doing?" I said, "Yeah, I'm not sure about this." So later on, I actually took a photograph underneath it and sent it off to our company safety officer. I said, "Look, this happened. It was my mistake for sitting too high. But this can happen if you sit too high and you get your feet tangled up. And it's not good to have your feet tangled up in the rudder pedals.
Not really, no.
Just normally you don't need them.
No.
Only if you've got one engine out or when you're landing. Then you do need them, quite importantly. But
the 76 good aircraft.
It was a lovely aircraft.
Well, the engineers I spoke to, they always said that like the 75 and 76 were great aircraft.
It was my favourite airline, particularly because we tended to go to really nice places and then spend a couple of days there.
Worthwhile, yeah.
And so that was really good from that point of view.
So how long were you doing the 76 run then?
Oh, right up until I retired really from the
airlines. Quite a while.
I flew the 75 as well.
Yeah.
So most months I would do one long haul flight a month, and quite often be away for a week. And then the other 3 weeks would be on short haul. If you did more than one long haul, you could rapidly run out of hours because there's a limited hours you could do in a week, and if you did it all long haul, you could use it up in 4 flights, and you'd run out of your monthly allowance. But I quite like the doing both, because it was nice sort of being able to get home every night for doing a short haul, but it was also nice sort of being forced to lie on the beach in the Caribbean for a few days.
Well, yeah, it must have been really tough. So retirement, did it come about because of the changes at Air 2000, or you just got to a retirement age? Or?
I got a retirement age,
basically.
But before that, we had the odd interesting incident on the 76. Things didn't always go to plan.
Okay.
And I was out in Orlando and coming back, and I was actually with one of our lady first officers, which she was a perfectly competent pilot, so it was fine. And we set up the computers for coming back, and we were pretty heavy coming out of Orlando Sanford, which was the charter airfield there. And I was handling the airplane, and I took off, and at Sanford what you had to do was level off at 2,000 feet and then take up a particular heading to intercept a VOR beam coming up from the other Orlando airport. You had to turn onto that and climb up that to a certain height. So you just program it into your computer, and you basically put the autopilot in 2,000 feet and watch to make sure it was doing the right thing. Well, I levelled off at 2,000 feet and my computer failed, and so standard thing was to switch to the other one, and that didn't come across and work either. So all of a sudden I had no computer in front of me. As a backup, we'd always set up on our standby instruments the VORs and things, and so all of a sudden I thought, I'm back to basics here. I've got to hand fly this at 2,000. Well, the autopilot came out as well. I've got to hand fly this at 2,000 feet. Look for the beam coming up. God, I haven't done this for years.
Yeah.
Well, you do it in the simulator, but no. And it was a heavy airplane. They're really sluggish. It's full of fuel, full of passengers. But it worked okay, and I climbed it up and eventually got up to level off. So I managed to get the autopilot to re-engage. And so my first officer then was seeing what we could do to sort it out, and so she got a phone pack through with the Americans to our engineers in Manchester, and she went on to the other radio to do that. So she'd interfered with the
normal stuff,
normal radio. And I spoke to air traffic. I said, "Look, I've got a slight navigation problem here. I might need to ask you for guidance." And I said, "Oh, okay. So you're clear to VOR such and such." Where the hell is that? I said, "That's 400 miles away." I said, "We can't see them at 400 miles. It's called the curvature of the Earth."
Yeah.
So I said, "Oh, okay. Well, we'll just keep an eye on you and give you vectors," which they did. And so she's on the other one, which I can't hear what she's saying because she's chatting to Manchester, and I can see her playing with switches up above my head there. All of a sudden, there's a click. The autopilot goes like, "Oops, I'm flying it again."
Right.
Because whatever she did sort of disengage the autopilot. And with your own computer at home, sometimes if it all goes to worms, what do you do to make it work?
You turn it off and restart.
You turn it off and restart it, exactly. Which is what they said from Manchester. They said, "You'll have to do a reboot." I said, "Okay." They said, "You'll have to make the airplane electrically dead to do it."
Okay, this is in flight going across the Atlantic.
This is in flight.
Yeah.
Well, we're flying a Great Circle route, which actually takes
coast,
you up the coast of North America, and then you curve across it.
That's the E-tops sort of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, E-tops. And so I said, "Well, we can't do that." So we arranged anyway to do an unscheduled landing up in the north of the States, so we could actually land, shut everything down, and then restart it again.
Right.
And also top up the fuel, because if we couldn't get it back, then we could fly the Atlantic using our VORs, just in the old-fashioned way, but we couldn't fly straight across the Atlantic. We wouldn't have the kit to do that. We would have to go up over Greenland and Iceland. It was called the Blue Spruce route, going up around that way. So anyway, we got up to Sanford, I think it was, in the States, and we went up there to discover that they had no radar. They had ILS, which I couldn't bring up properly on my screen. So it was all quite interesting.
Where was this you going to?
Gander
or something?
No, it wasn't. No, it was just north of New York up there. I can't think of it. It was an airport I hadn't been to before. The people who flew the 75s across would use it, and it was the only time I ever went in there. The name escapes me for the moment. But we didn't have any age particularly. Fortunately, it was a nice day, and we knew we were pointing in roughly the right direction, and we looked for it out the window.
That's a bit old-fashioned, isn't it?
Sort of found it later there, yeah. That happened to me a couple of times in my airline career. And so anyway, we shut everything down, and I thought, oh hell, I haven't really explained to the passengers what's going on. I think I told them that we're going to have to do an unscheduled landing, but I was a bit busy, so I didn't sort of go into detail. And but once I turned all the power off, I couldn't speak to anybody from the flight deck. And then we fired it all up again, and lo and behold, everything came back to life on the computers.
God.
And then I did have a long chat to the passenger on exactly what had happened, and that everything was fine, and and off we went and flew across the Atlantic without any problem.
There you go. Computers, eh?
So computers, yeah.
So how long was your actual airline career then? How many years was that?
Altogether, let's think, it was about, must have been nearly 18 years. I
Okay,
retired when I was 44 from the Air Force.
So it was your longest
And
sort of career bit?
I was 60 when it finished, so 16 years
No, okay.
altogether. Yeah.
But quite a long time for you.
But I was lucky, because when I got into UK, then I basically stayed with the same airline. They got taken over, but I stayed with the same airline. So I actually finished up with something like 13 years from my pension point of view, which made a big difference to my pension. And the pension for the first couple of years, I just got back what I paid into it, which wasn't very much.
So you weren't tempted to go like mega long haul or anything like that with, go to Cathay Pacific or something, or...
Well, the way the airline system works is you have seniority, and your seniority dictates which seat you're in.
Yeah.
And I was very lucky, because of very junior first officers, I got a command fairly quickly. And then once you get a command, as you gradually work up the command list, then it means you get more choice when you get leave and various things like that. If you join another company, the chance are you're going as the first officer anyway.
Yeah, and you're back in.
So when I left the Navy, several of the guys were applying to join British Airways. Well, I was 44, and I thought, at that time, they were retiring their guys at 55. And I thought, well, if I retire and join BA, I'll get 11 years. I probably won't even get to left-hand seat in BA over 11 years. And in fact, I chose sort of Air Europe to join, because I knew they were expanding, and they did say when I was going through the initial interview, they said, look, you should make a command within 2 years, which I did, but they didn't tell me the company was going to go bust in 2 years and 2 months.
So that was it then, you retired?
So yeah, I did my last flight, my very last flight was to Rovaniemi, which is up in Lapland.
Santa flight, yeah.
Yeah, in Finland. And the weather was awful. We were flying up there, we got an airplane full of kids in the back, all excited about seeing Santa Claus. And I look at the weather thinking, bloody hell. And the diversions weren't much better either. And I thought, I've got to land an airplane on a runway which has probably got a lot of ice on it. And we got it down. I remember sort of landing, that was on the 757, I landed it. And you've got non-skid brakes, but it was ice. And so the airplane, I came up to my turn-off, and I gingerly applied the brakes, and it just gently slid by the turn-off and carried on going down the runway. And I managed to make the next turn-off and very gingerly turned it off. And thinking, thank God.
A tough one to end on.
So I thought the last one, I had a couple of difficult landings. I think the worst one was in Montego Bay, Jamaica. And we were flying there, and usually on those flights we landed there, we're in the dark by the time we got there, and we did our fuel planning beforehand, but on my fuel plog, which is the progress thing for the fuel, which is all worked out beforehand, you're given it when you get in there, and it shows you how much fuel you need to take and how much reserves you've got and the rest of it. They put an extra 10 tons of fuel on the airplane, because I had the capacity to carry it, because it was cheaper to take extra fuel, because that airplane was then going to go on to Mexico the next day, and it was cheaper to take the fuel and burn a quarter of it for carrying the weight.
Top up, yeah.
Let's top up with the airline. This was despite the fact we kept getting things. Please carry minimum fuel when you fly, because it's more economic for the airline and better for the better for the climate. Yeah. And then as soon as it's cheaper, take an extra 10 tons of fuel and waste a quarter of it on the way.
Yeah, no surprise.
So We were quite heavy when we got to Montego Bay, and the weather, as is often in that part of the world, was awful. There were thunderstorms around the place. My weather radar was red everywhere when we were going around. And we set up for the approach, and it was absolutely belting down with rain. And air traffic said, they cleared us for the approach, and they said the runway's wet. And I thought, well, yeah, it probably is. There's rain coming down.
Wet.
And so we went through our landing checks, and I got some of my flaps down, and then it popped a message that I had a flap discontinuity, which meant that they'd stop the flaps moving because they weren't both moving evenly. And that can be fatal because that will roll you. So I didn't have full flap.
Right.
So I had something like 20 degrees of flap instead of 30 degrees of flap, which I would normally have had. With an airplane which was by then 7.5 tons heavier than it would normally have been. Which shouldn't have been a problem. They've got a reasonably long runway there, although it wasn't particularly nice weather. And so we quickly flipped through the checklist, which wasn't a problem for us, and we carried on going down. And as I landed the airplane, I could see through my landing lights that the runway wasn't wet, it was flooded.
Really?
All I could see was this massive water over the runway.
Wow.
And so we put it down, and you've got an auto brake system on the big airliners. So I had my auto brake already set to maximum for landing, which didn't appear to do anything at all. I had full reverse selected as soon as I touched down. So I overrode the auto brake with my foot brakes. That just still didn't make a difference. I seemed to be getting no deceleration at all going down the runway, because we were aquaplaning.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've heard the Formula 9 route P.
No.
P is the pressure of your tyres, which were pretty high on those airplanes, like probably 250 pounds per square inch. So if you take the square root of that, multiply it by 9, that's your aquaplaning speed.
But you're going in a straight line at that point.
We were going in a straight line, and I'm just sitting there with full reversing, which is chucking spray and stuff in front of me with the reversing, seeing the end of the runway coming up, thinking, come on, you bugger, stop. And we did, but we didn't have much runway left when we turned off. And I was thinking, oh, don't let me go off the end.
Oh, God.
But we stopped, and I thought afterwards, hell, without all the flap, which added an extra 10 or 15 knots onto our touchdown speed, with the extra weight, which added probably another 10 knots onto it, then I'm going 25 knots faster than I want to be, and then I'm aquaplaning down the runway. And it should have been within limits. The runway is long enough for me to land on a wet runway. And of course, once I realised it was flooded, it was too late really it's quite dangerous to try and put the power and go around, because you've now got the airplane not configured for taking off again. And you're reselecting your flaps to a different position, trying to keep it's not a good thing to do. So I didn't do that.
Sweaty palm time.
Sorry?
Sweaty palm time.
It was a bit, yeah.
Wow.
The other interesting one was on a 737 actually, going, I can't think which island it was now. It's one of the Greek islands, and it was one of these places which was a captain's only landing, and you had a hill either side of the runway, relatively short runway. I think we had about 6,000 feet of runway, something like that, which is enough but not a lot, with no undershoot at either end. One end was in the sea, the other end was in the sea.
Skiathos, is it?
It could have been. I think it was something like that. I can't remember the exact one it was, but I know those were the days when the Greek air traffickers were playing silly buggers, and they wouldn't operate the radar, and so the only radar cover we could get was from Athens. Well, as you started descending to the islands, you ran out of radar cover. So the last thing Athens said to me, "You'll clear to your destination. There's no known traffic below 10,000 feet." So okay, and we're approaching the runway from the south, and it was midday, so the sun was behind us, so we could see quite clearly. And so we're up, I suppose we're about 5 miles out, something like that, setting up the approach, all configured for landing, when air traffic, I could hear this chatter in Greek on the radio, and then they came up and said, this sort of female voice came up and said, "Can you see the helicopters?" I thought, what? And first officer was working the radio, and he said, "Oh, I've got them." And I arrived 1 o'clock low. I looked out, and there, down to the right, were 2 helicopters in formation, military green camouflage, sort of low down. So he spoke to them on the radio and said, "Yes, contact with the helicopters." So he continued the approach, and I went through 1,000 feet, runways ahead of us, when I met the other 2. And they were green camouflage helicopters against a green hillside in the background.
Nightmare.
And they were suddenly coming right in the bloody window. You know, they were right there on a collision course with me, and I pushed the throttles forward, pulled back on the stick, and I must have missed some 50 feet at the most, I think. I just pulled up over the top of them, and I saw it underneath me.
Good grief.
And then thought, oh, so they took the power off and let the nose carried on with the approach. And after we landed, I went up the tower, and I thought, I really got to discuss with the people in the tower. We weren't under control from the tower. The way it was set up, it was advisory information, so they would tell you the runway's clear, land at your discretion. So everything was at my discretion, not at theirs. And I saw this lady control, and I said, look, I don't know what happened then, but I very nearly hit those helicopters. I said, I missed them by the skin of my teeth, you know. Just lucky I reacted fast enough to pull up over them. I said, God knows what they thought, because they'd have had a lovely view of the underneath of 767 with its wheels hanging down. And she said, but I asked you if you could see the helicopters, and you said yes. I said, well, that's because they were two groups of two. There were four altogether, and we saw two helicopters, and in English, two is plural. And she said, but you heard me talking to them on the radio. I said, it was Greek, and we don't speak Greek. And at that point, and I said, you know, you could easily be out there now pulling bodies out of the bay, because if I'd hit them, we'd have gone in. And at that point, she burst into tears, and I'm going there, they're giving her a cuddle, you know. So I don't blame you, because we're landing at our discretion. I blame the guys flying those helicopters, flying across an active airfield right at the approach of
bit silly
of approaching traffic. And
well, that was a lucky one.
It was a lucky one. Yeah. Later on, they gave us TCAS, which is Traffic Collision Avoidance System. You know about that.
Yeah.
And so, so the first time my TCAS operated was, just to make it fair, it was when I was in Turkish airspace, climbing up out of Bodrum. And I was going up across Turkey. We used to practice with the TCAS in the simulator. They would throw it at you from time to time, so we were familiar with it. But it's the original one, and I don't know if you know how that worked. But
no.
On your old-fashioned type vertical speed indicator, you've got a needle, and if it goes upwards, it shows you climbing how fast. If it goes down, it shows you descending and how fast. Well, on the early TCAS, that would show you a contact at 6 miles range if it came up. And if you had a collision course climbing, the needle would show red in the climb, or the whole thing would go red, and you had to push it out of the red into and underneath it was green. And if you kept it in the green, you're going to miss who was in the collision course with you. Later on, we got better ones, which were on our main display, and that would show them at further range. So we climbed out of Bodrum with one of the original early TCAS. In fact, we'd only really just got the thing, and I heard them controlling a Turkish Air Force F-16. And I can remember they cleared him down to flight level 130, and they cleared me to level off at 120. So I said to my first officer, I said, well, we're probably pointing at each other because they're giving us 1,000-foot separation. I said, the TCAS might go off. I said, because, you know, we'll be pointing at each other, but then levelling 1,000-foot clearance, so we'll miss okay. I said, so don't be surprised if it goes off, but just keep your eyes peeled for the sky. F-16 is very small, especially with its head onto you. Yeah. And so up we went, and we got to almost to 12,000 feet, probably about flight level, I don't know, something like 11.6, 11.7, something like that. And up it comes, traffic. And when you looked at this little screen, it showed you a plus or a minus, showing how many hundreds of feet it was above you. And it was showing plus 1,000, which should have been all right, other than the fact I wasn't actually at my levelling off height, which meant he was already below his height. And it was ticking down. And I suddenly realised that he was coming down to level off at 12,000, and I was going to level off at as well. And then it came up, traffic, descend. It's coming over this, and it goes red at the top. So I said, geez, pull the power off, lower the nose down, pushed it into the green sector. Looking, I was like, ding, and an F-16 pings over our head about 300 feet above us, at my level of altitude. So I mentioned this to air traffic, who didn't say much to me in English, but they said an awful lot in Turkish to the other guy.
Yeah, God, that's scary.
Yeah. So the next time it happened was going into Orlando in a 767 with the first officer flying the aeroplane. So he's flying the aeroplane, and in the States they don't have the same sort of airway system as we have, and so particularly going into Orlando Sanford, you don't have a lot of controlled airspace around it. You tend to be in a sort of Indian territory. a lot of the time as you're descending down. So you've really got to look out the window. And they came up and said, you've got traffic 12 o'clock, 10 miles, something like that. Okay, 2 miles, you can't see 10 miles. And so we carried on. And all of a sudden on our main screen, it started showing us traffic. Dead ahead of us, there was traffic. And as we got a bit nearer, then all of a sudden we got traffic climb. And once again, the red went at the bottom this time, we got the green at the top. First officer flying, exactly what is required. Power on, autopilot out, pulls the airplane up to climb, gets the needle into the green. It's going climb, descend. And, oh, what? Power off, nose down into the green again. And then I saw Harvard looping the loop in front of us.
Oh, good grief.
And as it went up in version, I could see his helmeted head looking out through the windscreen as it went over the top of our aeroplane. But by now I'm approaching the magic age of 60, which is when we had to retire as a captain with no, it wasn't Aaron. No, it was by then. It was first choice.
First choice, yeah.
It changed the age to first choice by then. So we had to retire at the age of 60. But legally, we could carry on flying until we were 65. The only rule being that the sum ages of the two pilots mustn't be more than 120. So if you over 60, you had to fly the younger pilot. And that's what I was expecting to do. And so I was thinking about retirement and where I was going to go. And I had my house in Cornwall from when I'd been with the Navy there. So my plan was to go and retire into Cornwall. Well, one of the flights I was doing was in the 757 down to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. And on the way down, a business card arrived in the flight deck. And I looked at this business card, and one of the stewardesses brought it in. By then, the flight deck door had to be locked all the time because of what happened on 9/11.
Yeah. And
written on the back it was, "Do you remember me? I tried to kill you 25 years ago." And I turned it over, and it was a guy called Steve Hunt, who'd been one of my students when I've been a flying instructor. And he was then chief pilot of a little outfit in Sharm el-Sheikh flying a private jet. And so I said, "Oh, he can't come into the flight." I tell you what, it was fairly quiet at the time. I said to the first officer, I said, "You fly it for a bit. I'll just nip in the forward galley and just say hello to Steve." So I went out and said hello to him. And we were chatting about it. I said, "Oh, this is bloody ridiculous. Come into the flight deck. You're not going to hijack my airplane." And I thought, if the girls tell the management, I'll probably be in trouble. But I thought, no.
Yeah.
He's a fellow RAF bloody pilot. He's not going to do it. So Steve came in and we were chatting for a bit. And in fact, air traffic were trying to divert us to, was it Uganda? On the other side of the Red Sea down there, because Sharm el-Sheikh was full. They had a bunch of Russian airliners in clogging up the place.
Oh, right.
And Steve said, can I use the radio? I said, "Be my guest." And he pointed out to the radio that he was the pilot of this guy out there, who I eventually proved for myself, who was a big buddy of President Mubarak. And it would be very inconvenient if his pilot didn't get back on time. And so we got clearance to go to Sharm el-Sheikh.
So the first officer was impressed then?
Yeah, it was, yeah. So it's not what you know. And so we went in there. And we were chatting the way, and I just stayed on the flight deck for the landing and on the jump seat. And he said, "Do you fancy a job with us?" I said, "Well, I'm retiring in sort of 2 or 3 months' time." He said, "Well, let me know." So I thought about it and said, "Yes, please." And so I actually, during a weekend off, they picked me up in their airplane from Paris, flew me down to Sharm el-Sheikh, had an interview with the boss, said, "Yes, you're okay." Sent me back in the civil airline, and all of a sudden I had a job for my...
What aircraft were they flying?
Falcon 2000.
Oh, okay.
Which I'd never flown before.
Oh, right, yeah.
And so the day came and I did my last flight with the airline, and the fleet manager came in. He gave me quite a nice picture actually of a 757. I ought to put that on my picture somewhere. To commemorate my last flight. And he said, "We'd quite like you to come back in the summer." I said, "Oh, really?" He said, "Yes, we're always short of pilots in the summer." And he said, "So, if you like to, you can come back in the summer." He said, it won't be in the left-hand seat, it'll be as in the right-hand seat. So I said, "Do you want me to come back in the summer, do all the night flights with drunken holiday makers on board for a co-pilot's pay?" I said, "I've actually got a job in Egypt, so no thanks." And that was the end of my airline flying.
Oh, right, okay.
And
Good.
so, off I went. And on my 60th birthday, I was at Le Bourget in Paris doing yet another flying course, which I really wasn't expecting to be doing then. I was doing the Falcon 2000 course. And then I went out to Egypt. But that's another story for later.